Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Ijema Fab. So today I'll be making an A-line skirt known as a mermaid skirt with a cut together tail. So an A-line skirt or a mermaid skirt is just a normal regular skirt, but what makes this different is that it has an extension which starts from the knee and stops at the hem. To make the skirt, you'll be needing some measurements. So you need the waist circumference, the hip circumference, the waist to knee length, and the waist to your skirt length. To draft this skirt, we're going to start off by making a pencil skirt or a basic skirt. So I already marked out a line here. So this line is going to serve as the starting point. So this is going to be the waistline, and the length of the skirt is 45 inches. So I have 45 inches here plus 1 inch hemming allowance. The next thing I'm going to do is to mark the hip depth. So the waist to the hip depth is 9 inches. Then from the waist to the knee will be 21 inches. So instead of using 21 inches, I'm going to go upwards by 3 inches. So that's going to make it 18 inches. So the next thing I'll be doing is to extend this line. So on the waist, the circumference I'm working with is 36 inches. So quarter of the waist circumference will give me 9 inches. So I'm going to place 9 inches here. Then I'll add a 1 inch dart allowance. So the sewing allowance is going to be 1.5 inches. So if you're a beginner, it will be advisable for you to use up to 2 inches in case you want to turn with the lining. So on the hip, quarter of the hip circumference is 11 inches. So I'm going to mark 11 inches here plus 1.5 inches hemming allowance. So normally the dart doesn't get to the hip, so there will be no dart allowance on the hip. So the next thing I'm going to do is to move over to the knee. So on the knee circumference I'll be using will be quarter of the hip measurement minus 1.5 inches. So quarter of the hip circumference is 11 inches minus 1.5 will place me at 9.5 inches. So I'll mark 9.5 inches here plus 1.5 inches sewing allowance. So I'm going to connect these markings now. So from the waist, I'll connect to the hip this way, and from the hip, I'll connect to the knee. So after connecting, so you just blend a bit, just to avoid sharp edges here. Just blend. So the next thing to do now is to connect from the knee to the hem of the skirt. So for the bottom part of the skirt, to get the extension, it depends on how full you want it to be or the quantity of fabric you're working with. You use quarter of your hip circumference. So quarter of my hip circumference is 11 inches. So I'm going to add some allowances to the 11 inches. So you could add from 5 inches upwards. You could also use times 2 of quarter of your hip circumference. So for instance, if quarter of my hip circumference is 11 inches, times 2 will be 22 inches. I'll be making use of 19 inches. So I'll be adding 8 inches to quarter of my hip circumference. So I'm going to mark 19 inches here. So this is 19 inches plus 1.5 inches for sewing allowance. I'll connect from the knee down to the hem. So at the bottom part here, I'll be coming up by 2 inches. So I'm going to place 2 inches here and mark. So from these 2 inches, I'm going to connect it back to here. So after sewing and you don't curve this place, you have here falling or looking funny. So with my curve, I'm going to connect it back. So this is how the skirt looks like. So you have your waist, your hip, the knee, and the hem of the skirt. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to cut this out, and I'll be using this to trace the back panel. So I'll be using this to illustrate the back panel because my table can't contain the back panel. So if you notice, I've gone ahead to draw a line here. So I have a width of 7.5 inches from here to here. So this is going to serve as the extension or the train for the skirt. Our zipper allowance is also going to be along this way. So I'll bring in the front panel and place it on top of here, stopping on this line. So I'll place the front panel this way, stopping on the line. So for the extension from here to here will be 7.5. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to extend this knee line. So after extending this knee line, I'm going to take the zipper allowance along here. So the zipper allowance I want to work with is 1.5 inches, and I'll mark it up until the. So we're done marking out the zipper allowance. So the next thing now is to connect to join the extension. If you want the extension to be the same length with the front panel of your skirt, you're going to extend from the knee here all the way and stop around the same length of your skirt. So if you want a longer tail or train, you will need to add some allowances to the length of the back panel of the skirt. So we're going to use this as an example. So this is the original length of the skirt. You would come down as much as you want after the original length of your skirt. So at the original length of the skirt here, I'm going to come down by 6 inches. So I'll mark 6 inches here. So I've marked out the 6 inches. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to connect from the knee here all the way up until this point. So I've connected from the knee up until this point. So we now have our cut together tail or train. The next thing to do now is to connect from here, which is the side. I'll be connecting from there up to this point. So I'll connect from here this way till I hit this marking. So this is what I have, something like this. So you can use your curve to make it better. So you just connect from the side to your extension. So I connected from this side to the 6 inches I had. So I'll be cutting this out and tracing out the front panel. So this is how the skirt is looking after cutting out. So this is the extension or the cut together tail or train. So you can also make this as wide as you want. So like I use 7.5 for mine, you can make yours as wide as you want. So for the tail or train extension, you can always make it as long as you want. So for the knee, you go ahead and notch the knee on this panel here at the back and at the side here. So this will help you to properly align when you're putting your panels together. So to sew the skirt, the first thing I'll be doing is to take in the dart. I've gone ahead to mark out my dart allowance. So I did it on both panels for the back and also for the front. So after sewing the darts, the next thing to do now is to join the back panels together from the center back. So you're going to go ahead and mark out the zipper allowance all through to the knee. So I marked out 1.5 inches, which is the allowance for my zip. The next thing to also do is to connect from this knee now all the way to the hem. So to connect from the knee to the hem, I'll be making use of 1.5 inches. So you're going to use whatever you have as your zipper allowance. So I'll mark out 1.5 inches all through to the hem. So I'm done connecting the marking. So this is how it looks like. So I'll be sewing from the knee here straight down with this allowance and stop at the hem here. So the next thing I also did at the knee, you're just going to blend the knee a bit just to avoid sharpness at this part here. So I'll be taking this to the machine and close it up following this allowance. So after joining both panels of the back together, this is how it looks like. So normally after sewing, you will need to iron yours. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to close up the skirt. So I'll be placing both the front panel and the back panel right sides facing each other. So after placing the panels together, you notice that at the sides the skirts would not meet. So this is because of the excess or because of the train we have at the center back of the skirt. So when you want to close your skirt, you'll be placing them this way. You're going to place your skirt this way. After marking out your allowance, you place it this way and sew up. So you'll be repeating the same process on the other side of the skirt. So I'm going to go and close up the skirt with the allowance I have, and I will show you how it looks like.